Hello. Hello. We just want to welcome you here this evening to the campaign against RSE. And I'm sorry that you're not seeing my face, but unfortunately we've been having a few technical difficulties, and instead you're just going to hear my voice. But we've got Mark with us, and Wesley's not with us tonight, and neither's Clive. But we're going to open first of all our meeting as we usually do with prayer. Father, we just come before you now. Father, we just ask that you would be with us, that you would give us grace. And Father, we just thank you that you're the God of truth, that Lord, you are the way, the truth, and the life, and no man comes to the Father but through Jesus and Jesus Christ alone. And Father, we just, as we come before you now, we just ask that you would give us grace, that you would be with us, and Father, that you would help us defend the truth, each one of us defend the truth against the lies of the enemy. We just pray this now in Jesus' name, amen. Well, folks, I was just thinking about this meeting, and I feel that there's something that is important for us just to say before we begin this meeting, and I'm just going to read here from Titus 1, and it's Paul writing to his disciple Titus. For this cause I left you in Crete, that thou shouldst set in order the things that are wanting, and ordain elders in every city, as I have appointed thee. If any be blameless, the husband of one wife, having faithful children, not accused of riot or unruly, but a bishop must be blameless as the steward of God, not self-willed, not soon angry, not given to wine, no striker, not given to filthy lucre, but a lover of hospitality, a lover of good men, sober, just, holy, temperate, holding fast to the faithful word as he has been taught, that he may be able by sound doctrine both to exhort and convince the gainsayers. There are many unruly and vain talkers and deceivers, especially they of the circumcision, whose mouths must be stopped, who subvert whole houses, teaching things they ought not to, for filthy lucre's sake. So we're just this here is Paul writing Titus, and one of the things that he is adamant about is the importance that elders, that pastors, that they should not just be teachers of the truth, but also people who will reprove false doctrine and things and lies, because ultimately, if we believe that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, then we should be um, supporting that, but not just supporting that, but as people who lead and as shepherd their congregations, we should be people who are able to defend our sheep from the wolves. And there's nothing, as we think about this whole issue of RSE, there's nothing that is more shocking in terms of lies, that these lies are being taught to our children, that they're being taught throughout the whole of Northern Ireland. And nearly every household will be experiencing some of these falsehoods. So it's important that pastors, elders, the church members are out and defending the truth against these lies. So this is why we do. This is why we do what we do. This is why we're passionate about doing this. None of us take a salary. We're all here for one reason and one reason alone: to defend the truth and also to defend the sheep, especially the little lambs who are going to school to learn these false doctrines. So that's why we're here. Now, it's for that reason we're going to hand over to Mark, and Mark's going to give us an update on the situation. And as many of you know, there's been a huge, there's just since the 1st of January, there's been a change in the regulations, and also there's also been a change in that there's been a release of a lot of information. So, Mark, I'm going to hand it over to you, and do you want to give us an update on the consultation and an update as well on the new regs?
Yeah, thanks, Nathan, and very poignant words, considering what we're facing over the next period of time with the introduction of RSE regulations and some of the changes that are coming, and especially as we look towards the future and we look towards the further changes that will come. Now, if we take a step back, the last June, very important to set the context here, the Secretary of State stepped in, used the extreme powers given to him by Section 9 of the Northern Ireland Executive Formation Act to legislate in order to change the RSE curriculum here in Northern Ireland. Now, at the time, very importantly, he said that teaching about things like abortion and access to contraception should be done from a neutral stance that doesn't give any particular moral viewpoint. And he said he wanted to be very clear on that. He had an opinion that you must be neutral. And of course, that opinion is rubbish because it is simply not possible to be neutral when it comes to a moral issue such as abortion. Now, when back in kind of November time, the Department of Education launched a consultation where they were asking for opinions not on content that should be taught in the new RSE curriculum that is being changed by the Secretary of State, but they were asking about the opt-out more specifically for pupils. Now, what they did this week is they've introduced some guidance for schools in terms of the changes to RSE, but they've also published some legal regulations that cover the circumstances in which a child can be opted out of lessons. So really what we want to do tonight is we want to talk a little bit around the responses to the consultation, because the responses in itself were very interesting. We want to look at a little bit of the regulations with regards to opt-outs. And we want to talk more broadly about the guidance itself and some of the consequences of that guidance for the future of any restored executive and assembly that might appear in Northern Ireland over the coming months. So first of all, if we go to the consultation itself, and as I said, the consultation was it was very limited in its scope. There were very few questions on the consultation, and they mostly came from a kind of background where it was pretty much just asking about the opt-out and what the opt-out should look like. Now, one of the things that struck me about the consultation is that it ran over a very short period of time, and in that very short period of time, they managed to get over 13,000 responses to the consultation. I haven't got an exact figure to hand, but I am pretty certain that the Department of Education in Northern Ireland have never run a consultation that would have received that number of responses. So a huge response from parents, the public, teachers, other education professionals, and others in terms of responding to this consultation, with the vast majority of people who are responding to it being parents. Now, the first question on it was really interesting for me, and the response that we got to that question was of a particular note, I feel. Question one, or statement one, said that the content of teaching and learning resources for learning for life and work developed by SEA should be factual and contain age-appropriate, comprehensive and scientifically accurate education on sexual and reproductive health and rights, covering prevention of early pregnancy and access to abortion. And these resources should not advocate or oppose a particular view on the moral and ethical considerations of abortion or contraception. Now, that last little sentence that is written in bold there comes word for word from the statement that the Secretary of State made last June, where he said it must not advocate a particular moral or ethical view. So it is the opinion of the Secretary of State that we shouldn't have a particular moral and ethical view when it comes to teaching of abortion or contraception. And the responses to the consultation were such that 73% of respondents to the consultation disagreed with the Secretary of State on this. Now, if that's not a sign that the Secretary of State, Chris Heaton-Harris, is completely out of touch with the public in Northern Ireland, I don't know what is. This is a guy who is an unelected, unaccountable person in this jurisdiction. He has not received a single vote here. He has not got a mandate here, has never stood for election here. But yet he's saying how RSE should be taught in our schools. And it is clear that the public disagree with him, not slightly, but massively disagree with him. So Chris Heaton-Harris is as far out of touch with the opinion of people here in Northern Ireland as you probably could be. So that for me was probably the most interesting of the responses to the consultation. The second question in the consultation, if I go down to it here, says that parents and carers should be informed about the specific nature and content of the age-appropriate, comprehensive, scientifically accurate education in sexual and reproductive health and rights covering prevention of early access of early pregnancy and access to abortion. And perhaps unsurprisingly, given that there was so much concern around this, people said that very, very strongly agreed with this question, with over 91% of respondents saying they agree. So the public agree that parents should be kept in the loop and should be able to see all of the resources that pupils are going to be receiving in class. Now, from our side of the debate, probably the area or the question that caused most division among people on our side was question 3 or statement 3 that appeared in the consultation. And statement 3 said, if I can look it up here, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child includes at Articles 1 to 3 and 12 the rights of the child to express their views, feelings, and wishes in all matters affecting them and to have their rights considered and taken seriously. And at Article 5, the rights and responsibilities of parents and carers to provide guidance and direction to their child as they grow up so that they fully enjoy their rights. This must be done in a way that recognises the child's increasing capacity to make their own choices. The department's guidance, when developed, should consider in such circumstances how schools balance the rights of both children and parents/carers in implementing the regulations. Now, for those of us who have been involved in this for a long time or who have discussed this specific statement with the Department of Education, it was very obvious to us that this question specifically was attempting to address something that came out of the Human Rights Commission's report, where the Human Rights Commission were saying that there shouldn't be an opt-out at all. And they were trying to say that the child should have a right to access this education because this education affects them and the choices that they may make in the future. And of course, our viewpoint was very much that no, as parents, we have sole responsibility for deciding what our children should be exposed to and the kind of content that they should be exposed to. And we exercise that as parents in our own homes when we dictate what they can watch or what they can play on video games. We dictate the kind of content or people that they can be around with. We dictate their bedtime and the kind of food that they eat. So the idea that we would send them to school and the pupils would make the decision on whether they went to these classes goes completely against our moral and ethical viewpoint. Now, one of the problems that we did have with this question is that, and for us, the guidance that we gave on this question was very much we disagree. There shouldn't be an option to balance the rights of a child against the rights of a parent. And pupils should not have the opportunity to opt themselves into lessons if a parent has decided to opt them out of lessons, that the parent's rights must take priority over the pupil's rights. So we said disagree on this, and we were very clear that we must disagree with this statement in order to make sure that parents' rights come first. Now, part of the problem that we had with this question is that there were other organizations such as the Evangelical Alliance or the Christian Institute who said they neither agree nor disagree. So they took a neutral stance on this question and effectively tried to go middle of the road and said, well, we don't really have an opinion on this. Now, for us, we saw that at the time, we saw that as really shooting ourselves in the foot in terms of this fight. And I think what you see is in the responses that were received to the consultation, you can see that the reach of the Evangelical Alliance and Christian Institute is much bigger than our reach. They have a much wider base of support than we have. And you can see that has skewed the results of this question such that people who neither agree nor disagree made up 54.12% of respondents. So it looks as if 54.12% of respondents to this question didn't really care about it, didn't really mind either way whether parents should be able to opt their children out of everything or whether pupils should be able to opt themselves in to everything. And what we've ended up with is a situation where the opt-out effectively follows the guidance that was provided by the Evangelical Alliance and the Christian Institute. So we have, in the new regulations, we have a situation where pupils in years 8, 9, 10, and 11, so that's in old money, that's in Form 1, 2, 3, and 4, can be opted out of lessons around access to abortion and contraception. And parents can opt them out. And what the child says doesn't matter. However, on the basis of the responses received here, pupils in year 12 whose parents opt them out of lessons on access to abortion and contraception will be able to opt themselves into those lessons. So a pupil's opinion takes priority over their parents' opinion. And that middle of the road approach to the opt-out by allowing parents to opt some children out, but giving pupils the ability to override their parents for others, very much follows the guidance that was provided by the Christian Institute and the Evangelical Alliance. Nathan, do you want to come in with anything there? I know we've been talking about this over the course of the last few days.
Yeah, I mean, look, I sort of get it from the Christian Institute's perspective because they were sort of looking at the Welsh context and they were sort of saying, well, look, some in that context were saying, neither agree nor disagree. But the problem was the Welsh context is totally different. This is our context is coming from a situation of Section 9, which is being imposed by Westminster. Theirs was slightly different. As a result of that, though, the Department of Education did make very, very clear about one thing. They said that they would be taking, in the meetings that we were having, that they were going to take this consultation very, very seriously. And they have. And if you look, pretty much they've gone with the opinions of the majority. And because 54% said neither agree nor disagree, well, they went with the agree, which is, if you go back up there, you'll see their agree was
Right.
sitting there. Uh, it was higher than disagree, and the ones who were hitting agree were the radicals, those who wanted as much, and the ones who wanted to push the boat the door open for as much RSE um, radicalism as they could.
Yeah.
And we can see that 1/4 now.
Yeah, and
It's it.
you, yeah, we effectively could have had a situation where we had, those who were saying neither agree nor disagree and disagree. You can pretty much bet that the vast majority of them were in the same camp,
Yeah,
and we could have had a situation where, um, over 70%, well over 70%, could have been saying disagree to this question, had they been given appropriate guidance. Um, and because that question split people across a couple of different areas, we've ended up with a situation now where pupils, where teenagers who are 15 or 16 can override the parents of their wish or the wishes of their parents,
mhm.
um, and opt themselves in on lessons that their parents feel that they shouldn't be going to, which is a pretty um, shocking way to handle these things.
And the challenge of that as well is it leaves the 15-year-old open to a lot of exposure, because at the end of the day, it's not their parents' decision; it's their decision, and peer pressure, can come into play in this situation. Now, it is what it is. Now, we did warn of this before this happened. We did say, look, this is the way it was going to be, and now we've seen what we had predicted in our last online meeting. Now, as we see there, um, there's clearly only a minority of people who are wanting to push this radical agenda, but they're vocal. And unfortunately, a lot of these radicals hold key positions within the nation state. Now, what I would say is, it is it was quite clear that the Department of Education have been true. They want to respect school ethos. They want to respect um, the position and the place of schools, because they see that ethos is key to the success of the Northern Irish education system. But on this one, they went with what was the majority, which was 26.44%. But
Mhm.
so that's just the way it is.
Yeah, and it is unfortunate that we've ended up in that position. Just very quickly, the final consultation question was a little bit confusing because it was very much like statement two, where it was saying that parents should have the ability to get a view of all of the information um, that is being taught to pupils. And again, as you can see, as with question two, the responses mirror effectively what we saw for question two, which is perhaps unsurprising, given that the questions were very similar in their nature. So that's what the consultation said. But for me, the big talking point of the consultation responses was that the people of Northern Ireland once again have very clearly rejected the imposition of an RSE curriculum by the Secretary of State. That is the key headline from the consultation. People here do not want the Secretary of State meddling in RSE. Um, One of the things that you can then see also from the guidance that's been issued is that the Secretary of State has no understanding at all of how the curriculum in Northern Ireland is developed, and how it operates on a school to school basis. So if you go back to some of our videos from before Christmas, around September, we did a video where we explained how the curriculum in Northern Ireland works. And it's a unique curriculum in terms of what appears across the United Kingdom, where there is a minimum content order, there's minimum content that must be taught, but then it is up to schools to develop the curriculum that best suits the pupils that they have in their school. So, as a maths teacher, I have to teach certain minimum content, and certainly towards GCSE, whenever pupils are sitting in exam, there's a tighter, more rigid specification. But in the junior school, in years 8 to 10, it is up to us as a maths department to develop a curriculum that we feel is going to be best for our pupils. And what is taught in my school in years 8, 9, or 10 could be completely different than what is taught in another school. We may do a certain topic at a completely different stage of that development process than another school does the same topic. So the Secretary of State, whenever he laid his regulations, was very much of the opinion that the Department of Education should just be able to make a set curriculum on RSE and hand that set curriculum to schools and say, you must teach this. But unfortunately, that's not how the Northern Ireland curriculum works. And one of the things that I think was most encouraging for me whenever we had our meeting with the Department of Education was that there were those in the department who were very much annoyed at what the Secretary of State was doing. They were annoyed at his meddling, and they were determined to not do anything more than the exact demands of the legislation. And they were determined to not disrupt or damage the way the Northern Ireland curriculum works in order to give the Secretary of State what he wanted. So that was very encouraging for us. And what we see this week in the guidance that's been issued to schools is very much a reflection of the conversation we had with them kind of last September or October time, where they have added access to abortion and contraception to the minimum content order, but they are not going to dictate the schools how or when or from what slant it should be taught. For many schools in Northern Ireland who have a Christian ethos, they will be able to teach about abortion from an ethical and moral standpoint. So they will be able to teach. For example, I know of a number of schools who teach about human development from a scientific background. They teach that from the moment of fertilization, there is a unique human being created. And then they teach about abortion from an ethical and a moral standpoint through religious education. So there are schools who already do teach about abortion, but they teach it, and as the Human Rights Commission said, from a very anti-abortion viewpoint. And the guidelines that have been issued by the department will not stop schools from doing that at the minute. So schools will still be able to teach about abortion from an anti-abortion standpoint. They will still be able to teach about access to contraception, but teach about access to contraception that promotes an abstinence viewpoint, because these are viewpoints that match up to the ethos of the school. And that's how the Northern Ireland curriculum works. And one of the things that struck me over the course of the last few days as we've been kind of going through the consultation responses and going through the guidance is that some people are saying, yes, this is a victory, we've won, we've got an opt-out. The consultation was very clear that we reject what the Secretary of State says or wants, and the guidance is nowhere near as bad as we thought it was going to be. So we've won. But this is where the fatal flaw occurs. Think back to 2019, November 2019. We had a consultation where the government launched a consultation around abortion in Northern Ireland. 73% of people who responded to that consultation rejected the need for any change to the law. The vast majority of people in Northern Ireland did not want the law around abortion to change. And the Secretary of State and the Westminster government just ignored them, and they went and changed it anyway. And we have a situation now where over 7,000 children have been murdered through abortion in hospitals and clinics around Northern Ireland. The Secretary of State was very clear that he wants a curriculum that is extreme, that promotes abortion, but also contains a whole raft of other moral and ethical issues. And he wants it taught. He claims he wants it taught in a morally neutral sense, but of course you cannot have neutrality when it comes to moral subject areas. So what is going to happen now is the Secretary of State is going to well, a couple of things could happen. Human Rights Commission will already be putting in place plans to take the Secretary of State to court. They will say that the guidelines that have been issued are not CEDAW compliant. CEDAW demand that we have a curriculum that looks a certain way. These regulations are not CEDAW compliant, so they will take the Secretary of State to court over these regulations. The Secretary of State will be happy to be taken to court because he hasn't got what he wants in these regulations, and he will then use the fact that he's being taken to court as an excuse to legislate further and take further action to completely change the curriculum in Northern Ireland. Now, what happens in the meantime if we get Stormont up and running? What happens if we get an executive back in the talks in the meantime? Surely that would stop the Secretary of State. Well, again, that's a flaw because he holds all power, all control over the issue of RSE and over the issue of abortion now and forever, even if we do have a functioning executive and assembly. And that's probably the most important thing that people must remember. This fight is not done. It is only starting because the Secretary of State maintains all control over this issue, and he will exercise that control in the future to legislate to get what he wants because he's not getting it now. Nathan, any observations on that?
Yeah, I mean, look, come back to some of the things as well that you'd said. When you look in the details of so those are the headlines of how the questions are answered, but when you look at how the questions were answered, you see a real affirmation from people about the place of parental rights, right? So this is why it's a shame that question came out the way it did with because it looks clearly from the comments it's a totally different thing. I think it was something in that question like 64%, I think, if I can remember correctly, said that they believe that it should be about parental rights. Only 9% said the rights of the child should take precedence. But I think you're right. The thing is, look, and I don't. It is great to see that many in the Department of Education clearly want to keep the high quality teaching. They want to keep the same ethos that are for the schools. They want to keep the same ethos of the entire Department of Education. They don't want to have an English system. They want to have the Northern Irish system that has been tried and tested and has outperformed many of the other regions within the UK. Okay, so those are encouraging things. It's encouraging to see that the people of Northern Ireland are opposed to any this whole radical agenda. But what we have to realise is this is not the end. In fact, this is just the beginning. Because what we're going to have is, as Mark says, we're either going to have one thing, which is we're going to have a straight up the Department of the NIO moving in, Northern Ireland office moving in, saying, look, we're going to legislate over and above the head of the Department of Education, and we're going to instruct them just to do this, or we're going to have legal case after legal case taking the Secretary of State on. And that's, by the way, this doesn't matter whether or not Stormont's in operation or not, because if you have an education minister in Northern Ireland who's opposed to this, you're still going to have the Secretary of State is still duty bound under Section 9 primary legislation by the Sovereign Parliament. And it says in Section 9 of the Northern Ireland Executive Formations Act that the Secretary of State is fully responsible about fully implementing this. So it's not Stormont, it's not the executive, it's the Secretary of State and one individual, and he can be taken to court on that issue. And we know the intention, and we've seen the behaviour of the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission before to do that. So we're now left in a situation. Where do we go? What is the answer? Well, there's a number of different ways we can go. One way is just to say, look, this is going to happen. So just look, we've won, right? We can rest on our laurels, and look, schools still have a great degree of latitude and freedom. And you know what? You're right. But it's only for a short time before the inevitable happens and the Secretary of State or some activist group like the Human Rights Commission takes forward a case. Right? So we are still left with the same problem. Section 9 of the Northern Ireland 2019 Northern Ireland Executive Formations Act, it is the problem. Section 9 needs to be removed. It needs to be removed in full. And unless that happens by the Sovereign Parliament, we are going to be left in the stew. And look, we've got to face facts. Stormont isn't going to solve this. In fact, if Stormont comes back with Section 9 still there, it will be a crippled devolution. And it'll be a devolution that only works one way. And it will not work for anyone it will not work for the 75% of the population who doesn't agree with us. It's not going to work for the 75% of people who are not in support of any radical agenda. That's just the facts. And we have to realize that devolution will not solve anything.
Yeah, and the consultation shows the Secretary of State is so much out of touch with people here that he really should not be legislating on this because he hasn't a notion of what's going on here. And the people who should be legislating on this are the people who the 75% vote for and elect to represent their views in our devolved institution. But unfortunately, we're in a situation where the Secretary of State holds all of the power despite having none of the idea. So we're in a unique situation at the minute where we don't have a government here in Northern Ireland. We don't have a devolved government, but talks are ongoing with the UK government on how to get devolution back up and running. And for anybody who cares at all, for any political party who cares at all about the concept of devolution, for any political party who wants to legislate and take a stand on these issues that matter so much to so many people here in Northern Ireland, they should be demanding in these talks that the Section 9 of the Northern Ireland Executive Formation Act 2019 is repealed as part of the process of getting Stormont back up and running to ensure that these issues like RSE are dealt with
100%.
by the people who are elected to deal with them and who can represent the viewpoint of the people who elect them. Because anything else is not democracy. The idea that a single man based in England who hasn't had a single vote here can appoint himself as the Minister for Education in order to dictate what an RSE curriculum should look like is not democracy. That's dictatorship. That's a despotic regime. And we must do everything to fight against that. And over the course of the next couple of weeks, we're going to be providing you with an opportunity to contact your MLAs, to contact those people who represent you, that you voted for, and raise this issue with them. Raise the issue of Section 9. Tell them that you believe that they should be the people who are legislating on this, because if they don't legislate in the way that represents your views, then you vote for someone else. And that's how democracy works. So we're going to be giving you an opportunity over the next week or so to contact the MLAs, to talk to the MLAs about this, to demand that Section 9 is removed, it's repealed before any assembly or executive is formed, to ensure the power returns to the place where it belongs, and that is with the people who live here, who work here, who bring their children up, their families up here, and who clearly care a lot about this issue. So we'll be doing that over the next couple of weeks. We're also going to look at providing some guidance to schools, especially schools with a Christian ethos, on how they can mitigate the effects of the current guidance. We're going to be issuing some guidance for parents on how they can mitigate the effects of the opt-out and get round it. But in the meantime, we must be cognizant all the time that this isn't over. This is only beginning. And without the repeal of Section 9, we are going to be left with a sham government in Northern Ireland who cannot legislate and act upon many issues that matter so deeply to so many people here in Northern Ireland.
And remember, this is a constitutional issue. So if this happens on this issue, it's going to happen again and again and again. And what we have is not real devolution, but a partial devolution where Westminster will involve itself whenever it suits itself. So you can bet that this will not be the last situation. In fact, we're already seeing it on certain other issues like legacy. And, it was what Abolish Abortion warned of this 3 years ago. I warned about it myself when I was a local councillor. Many of us had seen this coming down the road, and it's a real problem. But look, I think there is, what it does show though, and I think we're not here to depress people though. It does show you that what can happen. Because let's put it like this. This was not on the agenda of most people. This went through Westminster without much turbulence until groups like this, other groups out there, Truth and RSE, we think about Let Kids Be Kids, and many other individual activists as well, and church folk as well. What by the collective efforts of lots of different people, Precious Life and other groups as well. And I don't want to name them all, but look, this is what can happen. So we have seen change, we have seen mitigations of this, but what we don't want to do is stop there. We have to push all the way to see this removed in Westminster, because Westminster is what caused the problem. It's Westminster's going to bring the solution by God's grace. And this is something I think where the challenge comes as well. So that is, we've laid down the strategic point from a legislative perspective, but there's another point. Churches. What has been shocking has been the silence of the church. Now, I don't mean individual churches have spoken up, and we were at a lot of individual churches and they hosted us. Other churches hosted other organizations, and we give thanks for that. But when you think of the four main churches, and particularly the Presbyterian, the Methodist, and the Church of Ireland, they were quite muted in their response on this. But when it came to other issues like getting Stormont up and going, they've been quite loud about these issues. And it's as we come back to what Paul says to all pastors, to all churches and all church leaders, we have to be at the forefront. It is a requirement to be qualified as a church leader, to not just proclaim the truth, but also defend it. And where is the church on this issue? Where are the church going to speak up on this? Are they going to put their voice and add their voice to this whole issue? They are God's prophetic voice in the nation, and it is vital that the church speaks out.
Yeah, and that's one of the things over the last few years that certainly we've noticed, and I actually, when you're talking there, it reminded me of a thing I saw a couple of days ago on Facebook, where a friend of mine who lives in the States was posting about a missionary called Jim Elliot who was murdered in Ecuador. And there was a beautiful quote from Jim, where he says, "Father, make me a crisis man. Bring those I contact to decision. Let me not be a milepost on a single road. Make me a fork that men must turn one way or another on facing Christ in me." And it would not be so beautiful here in Northern Ireland if that was the stance of our church, that we don't want to be a milestone, or we don't want to be a milepost. We want to be a fork in the road for the people that we meet, for the government that rule over us. We want to be a fork that they go one way or another, but they know very clearly that if they follow a certain path, they will be going against God, or they can follow the path that leads to God. And that is not just for the people that we speak to. It's not just for the people in the pews. It's for our nation and our government, and those who rule over us as well. So we've gone on 47 minutes now, so we're gonna call it a night there. But please do keep an eye up on our social media. If you're not in our WhatsApp group, you can join the WhatsApp group from the description of this video, because over the next week or so we'll be putting out some new materials, encouraging you to contact MLAs, and we hopefully after Christmas you're feeling invigorated, you're feeling ready, because 2024 we're going to have to fight for our kids and for our future and for the future of our land. So God bless. Thank you for tuning in tonight, and we'll speak to you soon.